Shattered glass scattered across the tiled floor, the scent of alcohol mingling with gunpowder, thickening the air. Amid the chaos, Dante Moretti, the notorious Mafia boss, staggered and fell, blood seeping from his side. The traitor had struck in the middle of the deal, and death seemed only seconds away. But it wasn't a loyal bodyguard who appeared. It was Lila Carter, the night shift waitress, her hands still trembling with fear, who bent down and dragged him out of his enemy's sight. She pressed her hand against his chest, her breath ragged as she whispered into the darkness, "Stay quiet and don't move." Just a small phrase, yet it altered destiny. From that moment on, the life of Dante, once built on blood and power, began to take an unexpected turn. Hey, Soul Stories fam! We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Please comment on where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. The nights in East Side were never quiet. Long, damp alleys reflected dim neon lights like streaks of spilled blood. At the end of the street, the Black Lantern Bar cast its murky yellow glow, a place where drunks, failures, and dangerous shadows came to waste their time. Lila Carter knew this place as well as she knew her own breath. At 23, she was thin but quick, working night shifts to pay rent and her mother's medical bills. The job was far from pleasant, wiping down beer-stained tables, dodging rough hands and forcing uneasy smiles at drunk customers. But for Lila, it was the only way to survive. That night, the bar was unusually crowded. Lila shivered slightly as she passed the last row of seats. A group of men in dark suits sat silently, neither drinking nor laughing. Their eyes were razor sharp, the air around them heavy with danger. Among them, the man in the middle made the entire room hold its breath. Dante Moretti, a name that made the whole city tremble. He was a mafia boss, infamous for his iron-fisted cruelty and chilling smile. Some whispered he once made a rival disappear overnight. Others said he had no heart, only power. To Lila, he was nothing more than a terrifying shadow, far removed from her small, ordinary life. She tried to avoid his gaze, quickly setting the tray of glasses on another table. But then chaos erupted. A deafening blast tore through the air. Glass shattered, people screamed, chairs and tables toppled. Lila staggered, her heart pounding, the tray slipping from her hands. For a split second, she saw the man beside Dante draw a gun, a black pistol aimed straight at the boss's chest. This wasn't a negotiation, it was betrayal. Most of the bar's patrons bolted, their footsteps pounding like war drums. Lila stood frozen. In front of her, Dante collapsed, his shirt blooming red at the shoulder. His eyes weren't panicked, but burning with a deadly fire. Even the devil himself was just a man when wounded, and the traitor was ready to finish him. Lila's entire body trembled, her mind screaming at her to run, to escape this place, yet her feet carried her forward as if pulled by an invisible force. She slid across the floor, dodging shards of glass, and suddenly grabbed Dante's bloodied arm. "Come with me," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. In the shadows behind the bar, Lila dragged him through a door leading to the wine cellar. Gunfire cracked behind them, a bullet slamming into a wooden barrel just inches from her. Her heart nearly burst from her chest, but she didn't let go. She pushed Dante against the corner wall, the metallic stench of blood mixing with damp dust. His face was so close, she could see every streak of blood running down his jaw. Dante's dark, fathomless eyes locked on hers, cold, sharp as blades, leaving her breathless. "Stay quiet and don't move," Lila whispered, her small hand pressed against his chest to hold him still. The room was silent. Gunfire upstairs grew distant, leaving only the frantic pounding of her heart. For a moment, Lila felt as if she had defied fate itself. When the noise faded, Dante moved. He pulled her hand away, her fingers stained red with his blood. His eyes, instead of furious, stayed fixed on her terrified yet determined face. A strange flicker passed through them, not the gaze of a predator, but of a man tasting unexpected courage for the first time. Lila's hands shook as she pulled back. She was just a waitress, a nameless girl, yet now she had saved one of the most dangerous men in the city. Dante Moretti said nothing, but his cold stare seared itself into Lila's mind, a mark she knew would never fade. The next morning, dim sunlight slipped through the torn curtains of Lila's small apartment. She sat blankly at the kitchen table, hands wrapped tightly around a cheap cup of coffee. All night, the image of blood-soaked Dante's shirt, his deep black eyes, and the echo of gunfire had haunted her. She tried to convince herself it had all been a nightmare. That was when she clocked in for her night shift again. Everything would go back to normal. The same old music, the stench of beer, the same drunken regulars slurring for more drinks. Mafia and gunfire didn't belong in her world. But Lila's heart knew the truth. Since last night, nothing would ever be normal again. That evening, the Black Lantern opened as if no chaos had ever happened. The owner, a pot-bellied man who hid his fear behind a greasy smile, had called a handyman to fix the door and replace a few broken tables. Customers streamed back in, laughter and chatter rising to drown out any memory of gunshots. Lila put on her uniform, trying to keep her face composed. But the moment she stepped inside, her heart clenched. In the corner booth reserved for special guests, someone was already seated. Dante Moretti. He wore a black shirt, collar slightly open, a white bandage peeking from his shoulder, the wound from last night. He needed no introduction. His presence alone froze the air. Drunks fell silent, and a few patrons even left earlier than usual. The atmosphere shifted the instant the boss walked in. Lila took a deep breath, telling herself, "Don't look, don't go near. He won't even remember you." But as she turned away, a low, gravelly voice cut through the noise. "Girl!" Lila's whole body went rigid. She turned, meeting eyes as sharp and cold as knives. Dante was looking straight at her. No smile, no polite nod, just a command. Swallowing hard, she walked toward his table. "What would you like to order, sir?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dante leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the tabletop. "I didn't come here to drink." Lila blinked, confused. She only wanted to do her job and stay far from trouble. But Dante's voice rolled on, low and heavy, weighing down the air. "You saved my life." Lila's heart lurched. The scene from last night crashed back. Blood, gunfire, his eyes in the dark. She shook her head quickly, trying to deny it. I didn't think. I acted on instinct." Dante raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into a faint, icy smile. "No one in this world does anything on instinct alone. You risked your life for me. I don't forget that." He leaned forward, voice dropping lower. "You saved me. Now I owe you a life, and I won't let anyone touch the person who saved me." Lila's eyes widened, scanning the room nervously. Luckily, the music was loud enough that no one else could hear. She lowered her voice, pleading, "Please, don't say that. I don't want to be involved in your business." Dante was silent for a moment, his gaze boring into her as if stripping her soul bare. Then he tilted his head slightly, his eyes darkening. "You think you have a choice? The moment you dragged me out of death, you stepped one foot into my world, and that world doesn't let go easily." The words felt like a sentence. Lila clenched her hands, her lips turning pale. She had only ever wanted a normal, safe life to take care of her mother. Yet now she'd become the savior of a mafia boss, a debt of gratitude no one dared to claim. Dante rose to his feet, moving toward her in slow, deliberate steps. Tall and imposing, he made the entire room hold its breath. When he stopped in front of her, he bent down and whispered just for her, "Relax. I won't hurt you, but I also won't let anyone else touch you. Consider this. From today on, you're under Dante Moretti's protection." His hot breath brushed her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. She wanted to scream that she didn't need his protection, that all she wanted was peace. But that voice, that gaze, felt like an invisible chain locking around her. When Dante left the bar, the remaining customers finally exhaled. No one dared ask why he'd come, and no one dared approach Lila. But for Lila herself, the real nightmare had only just begun. She knew well, once tangled in Dante Moretti's world, there was no turning back, and that dangerous bond had been sealed the moment she whispered, "Stay quiet and don't move." On the third night after the shooting, Lila left work earlier than usual. The bar owner muttered something about the atmosphere being strange lately, then shoved her small pay envelope into her hand as if hurrying her out the door. Hugging her thin coat, Lila stepped onto the street. Mist mixed with drizzle, and the streetlights bled across the pavement like streaks of ink. A black, unmarked sedan pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down, and the man in the front seat tilted his head, his voice low. "Lila Carter? Mr. Moretti sent me to take you home." She immediately stepped back. "I can get home on my own." The man didn't argue. Instead, he tugged up his sleeve, revealing a fine tattoo line, a serpent coiled around a sword. No explanation was needed. Lila knew he was Dante's man. He opened the back door, lowering his voice. "It's raining, and the streets aren't safe for you tonight." Lila froze. Dante's protection began like this. Soft, polite, yet still a command. After a moment of hesitation, she climbed into the car. The door shut, cutting off the sound of rain, leaving only the smell of new leather and an uneasy silence. But the car didn't head toward her shabby apartment building. Instead, it turned down an empty road, slipped under an overpass, followed a long brick wall, and stopped in front of a converted warehouse with a gray rolling door. A cold beep sounded as the door opened. "This isn't my home," Lila said, her heart pounding. "Safe house," the driver replied. "He wants to check something. Won't take long." "Check what?" The rear door swung open. Dante Moretti stood beneath the awning, half his face lit by a fluorescent tube. He wore a charcoal trench coat with the collar turned up. His left shoulder was still bandaged, but his movements showed no hesitation. His eyes cut into Lila like a blade. Calm, unreadable, but sharp enough to make anyone bow their head. "Come in," Dante said. Inside, the warehouse was divided into glass partition rooms. Figures moved about: bodyguards, nurses in lab coats, a silver-haired man with a briefcase, likely a lawyer, and a few men tied up, seated on metal chairs. The air reeked of antiseptic mixed with damp iron. Rainwater streaks stretched across the concrete floor like ink trails bleeding off a page. "Why did you bring me here?" Lila asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "To show you this," Dante replied, his eyes locked on a young man slumped in a chair, sweat-soaked hair hiding his face. "So you'll understand why you can't stand between two shores." Before she could argue, a glass door slid open. Two guards dragged the young man forward. He trembled, lips split, shirt stained with blood. Dante stepped closer, stripped off his leather gloves, and tossed them onto a table. "Marco," Dante said, his voice smooth as velvet yet ice cold, "you've worked for me 7 years." Marco's eyes darted up, wild. I only... They promised they'd... There is no they, only your choice." Dante's fingers brushed his bandaged shoulder, a reminder. "I live by one principle. A traitor leaves the table, through the front door, or in a plastic bag." A chill shot down Lila's spine. She glanced around. The doctor with his medical bag, the lawyer flipping through files, the dark-haired woman, a counselor perhaps, jotting notes. Everything unfolded with grim order, as if violence itself were scripted by discipline. I have an old mother," Marco sobbed. "I was scared. They said they'd spare me if I took you down." Dante tilted his head. "So you chose to kill me to live." A neat equation. Too bad. The result is poor. He held out his hand. A guard placed a folding knife into his palm. Dante didn't look at Lila, but spoke loud enough. "If you want to look away, do it now." Lila stood rooted. She hated violence, hated blood. Yet her feet refused to move. Some part of her, one she dared not admit, wanted to know what Dante would do, to stare into the truth of the world that had dragged her here. "You sold me out to save your mother," Dante continued, his voice steady. "But I don't sell out my family. Do you know why everyone here still stands, Marco? Because they never sold me out." Marco shrank back. Dante circled behind him, pressed the blade against the ropes, and with a sharp slash, cut them free. The ropes fell to the floor. Marco blinked in shock. "Stand!" He staggered to his feet. "Raise your head." Marco obeyed like a puppet. "Look around," Dante ordered. "No one here touched your mother. No one on my side." However, if you remain in this city after tonight, those who bought you will come for her first, because they'll believe you're still worth something, and the value of a traitor is betraying again." The room fell so silent that the rain tapping on the tin roof echoed like drums. Dante flipped the knife shut and slid it into his pocket. He gestured. The guards yanked a hood over Marco's head. Chains rattled faintly. "You'll kill him?" Lila blurted, her voice raw with fear. Dante turned toward her. For a fleeting moment, his gaze softened. "I'll send him out of the city tonight, with a bus ticket, a bag of cash for a few months, and a warning. If he returns, I won't repeat myself." Lila hadn't expected that answer. She thought punishment in Dante's dictionary meant only one thing. But it seemed he had rules of his own. Ruthless still, but not reckless. Marco was taken away. The rolling door slammed shut. The room returned to its cold order. Leela exhaled, realizing her fists had clenched her coat so tightly her knuckles were white. Dante tore off his bandage. A nurse stepped forward, but he waved her off. "Later." Then he walked toward Lila, stopping just an arm's length away. The scent of rain lingered on his coat, mingling with antiseptic. "You've seen," Dante said. "This world runs on fear and choices. People bend the rules of right and wrong just to live another day. You think you can stand outside it after that night in the bar?" "I don't belong here," Lila replied, forcing her voice back. "I'm just a waitress. I want to work, go home, and take care of my mother. That's all." "Too late." His tone was low but firm. "The night you pulled me from a bullet, you crossed the line. Because I saved you? Because you gave me something no one gives men like me, a chance to live. People like me don't get that often." And then Lila saw what she had missed before. Dante's left pinky trembled slightly when he clenched his fist, a remnant of pain or something older. She noticed the thin scar running from beneath his collar to his clavicle, the way he hunched slightly when the draft slipped through the door, as if he had endured countless nights on cold concrete. "You've been betrayed before?" The question slipped out before she could stop herself. Dante's lips faltered, as if a pen had stopped mid-stroke on paper. He didn't answer right away. His eyes flickered with memories only he could see. Then softly, "The first person who taught me betrayal was blood." The space suddenly shrank. Lila felt as though they were trapped in a room without doors, where every word ricocheted off the walls and back at them. She swallowed the metallic taste of fear and something else, a dangerous spark of curiosity. "Let's go," Dante cut in, turning away. "I'll take you home." "Not the safe house again?" "Not tonight," he said, then added cold once more. "But from now on, my men will follow wherever you go. I told you, I won't let anyone touch the person who saved me." They stepped outside. The rain had stopped. The streets were black as ink, quiet, without the sound of horns. Lila sat in the back seat, fingers drifting unconsciously over her chest. Her heart pounded, not only from fear. Something fragile had begun to grow, a thread stretching across two cliffs. Curiosity about a man the city called a devil, but who bowed his head to a whispered command that saved his life. When the car stopped at her apartment block, Dante didn't step out. He looked at her through the rearview mirror, his reflection meeting her weary, stubborn, frightened eyes. "Tomorrow," he said, "don't take the South Alley. Valenti's men are waiting there." "You're watching me?" "I'm repaying a debt." The guard opened her door. Cold wind hit her cheeks. Lila stepped onto the curb, turned back to say something. Thanks, protest, plea. But the sedan had already melted into the night. In the darkened lobby, she stood motionless. Violence, law of the jungle, blood, betrayal. They had just swept past her like a film reel. But in those dark frames, one detail clung stubbornly. Dante's trembling finger, and the silence he gave a life that should have been erased. Her heart tightened, with fear, then loosened, with curiosity. The two feelings twisted together like strands of rope, pulling her toward a world she knew she should avoid, but had already stepped into. Outside, the streetlights flickered. Across the gray sky, a thin streak of light tore through the clouds like a blade. Lila closed her door, leaned against the wood, and shut her eyes. Somewhere out there, she knew Dante was also looking up at the sky, with steel eyes that hid a wound so deep no medicine could heal it, unless someone dared to touch it. At night, the city felt increasingly like a sealed box, shrouded in fog and fear. These days, Lila Carter was no longer the naive waitress who only thought about her shifts and rent. Since that night at the warehouse, Dante Moretti and his world had become a long shadow stretching over every step she took. She clung to the scraps of normalcy she had left, her work schedule, unpaid bills, and especially her conversations with her only close friend, Maya Turner. Maya also worked as a waitress at a small cafe. Strong-willed and outspoken, she had always been Lila's anchor. "You have to get out of here," Maya said when they met in Lila's cramped apartment. Outside the window, rain whispered like a warning. "I saw someone hanging around the street last night. They're not neighbors. They're watching you." Lila held her hot cup of tea, her hands trembling slightly. "Who do you think they're with?" Maya's tone turned sharp. "Moretti's enemies. You saved his life, and now you're a weakness they can exploit. I know Dante's dangerous, but the people going after him are even worse. If you stay in this city, you'll never be safe." Lila stayed silent. Part of her wanted to do exactly as Maya said, pack a bag and vanish from everyone's sight, but her heart hesitated. Some part of her, deep inside, didn't want to run. Not because she believed she was safe, but because every time she thought of Dante's steel-gray eyes, she felt there was something there she hadn't yet decoded. The room darkened as a large vehicle came to a stop below the window. Headlights cut a swath of light through the apartment. Maya jumped. "Who's that?" A knock came at the door, not hurried, not timid, firm, deliberate. Lila rose, her heart pounding. She knew who it was before she even slid back the lock. Dante Moretti stood there, his long coat soaked with rain, his eyes darkening as they flicked over Maya. He didn't need greetings, only one clipped sentence. "They've caught her scent." Maya stepped in front of her friend. "She's not yours. Leave Lila alone." Dante didn't turn his head. His gaze stayed fixed on Lila. His voice was low, but it filled the apartment like a tremor. "Stay with me, and I'll protect you. Leave, and they won't let you survive." The air thickened. Maya stared, then burst out, "Is that a threat?" "She's not your property." Dante still didn't look at Maya. He took a slow step inside, the chill of rain following him. "I'm not threatening," he said evenly. "I'm telling the truth. The people trying to bring me down will use any means. And she," his eyes moved over Lila, deliberate, "is already a target." Lila's shoulders trembled. She remembered Marco being dragged away in the warehouse, the flash of the knife, and that cold but strangely measured answer. "If he comes back, I won't repeat myself." Those weren't the words of a man who only killed, but of someone who understood the cost of betrayal. Maya gripped her friend's hand tightly, her voice firm. "Lila, you can go. We can leave the city tonight." But Lila didn't move. She looked at Dante and saw, beneath the cold layers of steel in his eyes, a fine crack, something even he might not want anyone to see. Her voice caught. "I don't want to be part of your war. I just want a normal life." Dante stepped closer, now only half a meter away. "Normal," he pronounced each word slowly. "You lost normal the night you pulled me into the dark." Silence pressed down. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, then faded. Inside the apartment, only 3 people remained, and one harsh truth. Lila had become the focal point of a hidden war she never chose. She didn't know where she would go or what path she would choose. But one thing she knew for certain, at that moment, the vortex had begun, and there was no way out. On rainy nights, the Black Lantern Bar was usually deserted. The dim yellow lights hanging from the ceiling made the place feel more like an old, tired room than a spot for entertainment. Lila wiped down the bar counter, keeping herself busy, though her eyes kept drifting toward the far corner, the spot that had become Dante Moretti's territory. He came almost every night. No noise, no entourage. Just himself, a long coat draped over his shoulders, a half-burned cigar between his fingers. He would sit for hours, never ordering more than a glass of whiskey, like a dark statue in the corner. Each time Lila brought him his drink, his deep black eyes silently followed her, without a word. At first, Lila found it unsettling. That silence felt like a hidden blade lurking in the dark. But over time, she began to notice something different. Dante's eyes weren't simply scrutinizing her. They were observing a world he seemed never to have belonged to. One night, when only a few drunks slumped over their tables, Lila heard the scrape of a chair. Dante emerged from the shadows and walked toward the bar. She looked up, startled, as he stopped right in front of her. "Do you always polish this counter?" he asked, his voice low, tinged with dry humor. "Maybe because I don't know what else to do," Lila replied, then realized she sounded a bit sharp, but Dante only smirked, a faint smile like smoke. "I used to think life revolved only around power and bullets. But here, watching you work, it feels like watching a different life, a life I've never touched." The words froze Lila. For a moment, she didn't see a mafia boss standing before her, but a lost man, someone on the outside of a normal world. The next day, Lila made a bold decision. After her morning shift at the cafe, she returned to her small apartment, mixed flour, sliced apples, and baked her first apple pie in years. It was her mother's recipe, a taste tied to the rare moments of laughter in her childhood. That evening, when Dante sat in his usual corner, Lila didn't bring whiskey. Instead, she carried a small plate with a warm slice of apple pie, its sweet aroma filling the air. "This isn't on the menu," she said, her voice a little shaky. Dante raised an eyebrow, eyeing the golden crust. "Planning to poison me with apples?" "No one spends hours baking just to kill someone," Lila shot back, then flushed, realizing her tone. Silence hung for a beat. Then unexpectedly, Dante let out a rough laugh. Not his usual cold half-smile, but real laughter. Deep and hoarse, like it had been locked away too long. The sound stunned Lila. For the first time, she saw him as a man, not just a boss. "All right," Dante said, picking up the fork. He cut a piece, placed it in his mouth, and chewed slowly. The buttery crust and sweet tart apples melted on his tongue. For a second, his gaze drifted, as though carried somewhere far away. "Well?" Lila asked softly. Dante set the plate down, his eyes fixed on her. "Dangerous. This could make me forget who I am." "It's just a slice of pie," she said, half teasing, half serious. He shook his head, his gaze sharpening again, though the trace of that strange smile lingered. "No, Lila. It's not just a slice of pie. It's something men like me don't get." Lila fell silent. She understood then. Beneath the cold armor, Dante Moretti was profoundly alone. He had built an empire on blood and betrayal, but in return he had never tasted the simple warmth of apple pie on a quiet evening. From that night on, the distance between them shifted. Dante no longer sat silently in the shadows. He began to talk with Lila, about the bar, about old songs, sometimes just to ask her a casual question. And Lila, every time she caught his eyes, saw a quiet sorrow behind them, like a thick wall of ice slowly cracking apart. Inside her, fear and curiosity twisted together. And worse, another feeling crept in, the wish to see that smile again. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. That night, the Black Lantern closed early. The owner claimed it was for repairs, but Lila knew there was something more to it. The city buzzed with rumors of a purge in the Mafia underworld. Whispers said blood had already spilled at the southern docks, that names were vanishing overnight. Lila sat behind the counter, polishing the same empty glass over and over. Unease made her hands tremble. She had learned not to ask too many questions, but her mind replayed the rare smile Dante had shown her the night of the apple pie. The contradiction tore at her. One part of her knew he was dangerous, the other part of her heart refused to turn away. The door banged open. A cold gust swept in, carrying the faint, metallic stench of blood. Lila gasped and looked up. Dante Moretti walked in. He no longer carried his usual commanding presence. His shirt was shredded, blood soaking his arm and side. His face was pale, but his black eyes still burned with deadly fire. No guards followed, Only darkness clung to him like a second shadow. "Oh my God," Lila whispered, rushing toward him. You're badly hurt." Dante collapsed into a wooden chair, his bloodied hand bracing against the counter. His voice was hoarse, ragged. "Just scratches. I'll be fine." But Lila saw the deep gash in his shoulder. She knew he was lying. Without thinking, she dashed into the storeroom and grabbed the old first aid kit. When she returned, Dante's eyes were closed, his breathing heavy. Kneeling beside him, her hands trembling, she opened the bandages. "Don't touch me," Dante growled. But when he met her gaze, steady despite the tremor in her hands, he fell silent. Lila gently pulled away the blood-soaked fabric, carefully cleaning the wound with alcohol. The harsh sting mixed with the metallic smell of blood made her stomach churn. But she bit her lip and kept going. "You're insane," she muttered. "Throwing yourself into death like that?" Dante let out a low, painful chuckle. "That's my world, Lila. You survive by being stronger, or crueler." "And end up bleeding out?" she shot back, eyes shining. "You can't keep living like this." He looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, the steel in his eyes softened. "You don't understand. Once you're in, there's no way out." Lila pressed the gauze harder against his wound. "So you are human after all. A man who feels pain?" The simple words froze Dante. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to shed the smell of blood and the rain outside, leaving only the sound of their breathing, blending together. When she finished the final wrap, Dante suddenly caught her hand. His grip was cold, sticky with blood, yet strong enough to send a jolt through her chest. His dark, fathomless eyes locked onto hers, not with the gaze of a ruthless boss, but of a man battling something inside himself. His voice was raw, broken, like a confession forced from him. "You have no idea what you're doing to me." Lila froze. She didn't know what to say. In that moment, caught between the lingering bloodlust and the fragile tenderness revealed, the ice wall around Dante cracked once more. And Lila realized. She was stepping deeper into the spiral, unsure if there would ever be a way back. The city was quiet at night, streetlights glimmering on puddles left by the rain. In a small upstairs room of the bar, Lila sat across from Dante. She had just finished her shift, while he remained, his shoulder wrapped in white bandages, his face hollow from days of relentless fighting. For reasons she couldn't explain, Lila didn't head home like she usually did. There was something in Dante's eyes that held her there. Not the constant fire of violence, but something unnamed, heavy, shadowed, and perhaps lonely. "You shouldn't be out like this," she spoke first, her voice gentle as if afraid to break the silence. "Your wounds aren't healed yet." Dante gave a faint smile, one that never reached his eyes. "I've carried scars long before you ever knew my name, Lila. One more won't change anything." Lila pressed her lips together. "You say it like you don't feel anything anymore." He lifted his gaze. His black eyes didn't blaze like they did when giving orders. Instead, they sank, bottomless, swallowing the light. After a long pause, Dante exhaled. "Maybe it's time you knew why I became what the city fears." Lila stayed quiet. Leaning back, Dante's eyes drifted somewhere far away. "I once had a family. My father was one of the first arms dealers in New York. He believed power could protect everything. But one night, his most trusted man betrayed him. Another gang stormed our house, gunfire like thunder. His voice was hoarse, every word dropping like lead. I was 10. I heard my mother scream, my brother cry, then silence. When it ended, I was the only one left, abandoned in the wreckage. It was my godfather, the man my father trusted most, who handed us over in exchange for territory." Lila's hand covered her mouth, her heart tightening. "Oh my God!" Dante tilted his head slightly, a bitter smile flickering. "From that night, I learned one truth. Trust is the knife driven straight into your chest. I swore I'd never be betrayed again. I built my empire with blood so no one would dare touch me. And yes, I became the devil in everyone's eyes." He stopped, his hand clenching his glass until his knuckles whitened. "But when you look at me," his voice dropped, almost a whisper, "I see something I thought died with my family, humanity. In that moment, Lila said nothing. She simply let her eyes rest on him, without pity, without fear, only a quiet understanding, a silent forgiveness. Dante turned, catching her gaze, and for a fleeting instant, the iron wall around him cracked. He wanted to look away, to hide, but he couldn't. The distance between them was so small Lila could hear his uneven breath. Her hand rested on the table's edge, and Dante's fingers brushed against hers. Even that brief touch sent both their hearts racing. "Lila!" His voice rasped as though saying her name for the first time. She lifted her eyes, lips parted slightly. In her brown eyes glimmered a strange courage, the courage not to run, to stay in front of this dangerous ghost. Neither spoke further. They both knew one step closer, and there would be no turning back. Dante pulled his hand away, his eyes hardening once more. He rose, shrugging on his coat. "You shouldn't be near me. I lost everything once. I'm not sure I could survive losing it again." Lila lowered her head, her hand still warm from his touch. Inside her, a storm raged. Fear, compassion, and something else she wasn't ready to name. When the door shut, his silhouette vanished into the dark hallway. Lila knew then that they had crossed a line. A fragile, dangerous feeling had taken root between two people from opposite worlds, and both of them were afraid of what they felt. Rumors spread faster than bullets. After just one night, whispers crept through every street corner. "That waitress, she's Valenti's spy." Dante's men muttered in casinos and along the docks. Even inside the Black Lantern, when Lila carried her tray of drinks, she felt the sharp stares of suspicion pierce her like knives hidden in the dark. She had no idea what was happening, but when Dante appeared that evening, his face colder than she had ever seen, Lila knew the real storm was about to break. He sat down at the table, not ordering whiskey as usual, just silence. His men quietly pulled back, leaving a chilling emptiness between them. "Sit down," Dante ordered. Lila set the tray aside, her palms slick with sweat. She sat across from him, her heart pounding. "My men heard this," he said, his voice low and steady, each word a blade. "You met with Valenti." Lila's eyes widened. "Met? I don't even know who he is." Dante placed an envelope on the table. Inside were blurry photographs. Lila standing on a street near the docks. Beside her, a man whose back resembled one of Valenti's enforcers. Lila's head spun. "No! I was just buying medicine for my mother. That man asked for directions. I didn't know who he was." Dante's gaze darkened. "Do you realize that one small mistake could get dozens of my men killed? You think I betrayed you?" Her voice cracked, choked with both outrage and hurt. Dante didn't answer. He stood, pulling a folding knife from his coat pocket. The blade glinted under the yellow light. One of his men stepped forward. "Boss, if she's a spy, it's best to deal with her now." Lila froze. Her chest tightened, her throat closed. All the nights she had tended his wounds, all the times their eyes had met, suddenly felt meaningless. Dante stepped closer, pressing the knife to her throat, close enough that Lila could smell the faint blood still clinging to his clothes. "With one order," he growled, "you disappear, and my organization stays safe." Tears burned her eyes, but she didn't look away. She held his furious gaze, her voice trembling but clear. "If you believe I betrayed you, then do it. But never forget, it was me who whispered, 'Stay quiet and don't move,' so you'd still be alive today." The knife stopped. Dante's hand faltered midair. His eyes flickered, cold, furious, then unsteady. Slowly he stepped back, the blade trembling slightly. The room was deathly silent. Every man held his breath. Dante shut his eyes and drove the knife into the table. His voice was hoarse, like wind seeping through a crack in the door. "Get out of my sight." Lila froze. Her heart tore apart inside her chest. She wanted to scream, to beg him to believe her, but her shoulders felt too heavy. She rose step by step, leaving the room without turning back. Outside, the rain fell again. Cold drops mixed with the hot tears streaming down her cheeks. She had saved him, dared to believe in him, glimpsed the ghost of his past in his eyes. Yet a single trap, A single lie was enough for him to turn his blade against her. Inside, Lila carried only one bitter truth. Dante Moretti did not trust her. Perhaps he never had. The door closed behind her, sealing in the icy void. Neither of them knew that, from that moment, the fragile thread binding them had snapped, and the spiral of tragedy had only just begun. 3 days. Only 3 days had passed since Dante drove Lila away, yet to him it felt like a century. Nights once filled with gunfire and blood now felt suffocatingly empty. He couldn't shake the image of her tearful, trembling eyes, the way she had looked straight at him when the knife touched her throat. Not with fear, but with pain and disappointment. But the truth had finally surfaced. Through his network in the shadows, Dante discovered that one of his closest men, Rossi, who had been with him from the beginning, was the one selling information to Valenti. It was Rossi who had forged the evidence to pin everything on Lila, deflecting suspicion from himself. When Dante slammed the original photos onto the table, Rossi crumpled to his knees, face ashen. I was forced. Dante didn't listen further. One dry gunshot ended it all. But the sound brought no relief, only a heavier weight on his heart. He had been wrong. Terribly wrong. No enemy had ever made Dante Moretti afraid. But for the first time in his life, he felt out of control because of a girl, a stubborn, small girl who had dared to face the Mafia boss without lowering her eyes. Lila, he whispered her name, his voice catching. From that moment, the search began. He scoured every corner of the city, from the rundown apartments in East Side to late-night diners to the crowded subway stations. His men spread out everywhere, but no one saw Lila. She had vanished as if into thin air, leaving him in a storm of rage and desperation. One night, Dante went alone to the filthy alley where she had once lived. The apartment door stood open and empty, a cracked teacup still on the kitchen counter. He stood there for hours, his hand brushing a small scratch on the door, a mark of her ordinary life left behind. What had he done? Finally, a lead appeared. A black market cigarette peddler claimed he had seen a girl resembling Lila board a bus heading for the coast. Without thinking, Dante bolted, leaving his bodyguards behind. His sedan tore through the night, over pothole-riddled roads and slick bridges. The salty sea wind rushed in as he stopped at a small coastal town where the streetlights flickered like dying candles. He found her there, sitting in an old diner, hair loose, eyes tired as she stared out at the dark sea. A cup of cold coffee sat in front of her. Lila looked up at the sound of the door. When she saw Dante, she froze. But instead of surprise or joy, her eyes were cold, as still as the ocean's surface. "So you finally found me," she said, her voice dry. Dante stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Lila, listen to me." "Listen to you?" She gave a short, bitter laugh. "What's left for me to hear? That I'm a spy? That I deserved your knife at my throat?" He flinched, each of her words cutting back at him like blades. "You never trusted me, Dante. Not when I risked my life to save you, not when I sat and listened to your past. In the end, you still trusted blood more than you trusted my heart." Dante's fist clenched, helplessness rising. "I was wrong. It was Rossi. He betrayed me. He set you up. I didn't see it." Lila stayed silent, her eyes glistening but dry. "Your mistake almost killed me. I can't live in a world where trust is that cheap." He stepped closer, his voice sinking low. "I can't lose you. Not after everything." "You've already lost me, Dante." Her answer was sharp as a blade. The air thickened. Outside, the ocean waves beat steadily, underlining the distance between them that could not be bridged. Dante stood there bathed in dim yellow light, and for the first time, the Mafia boss's face showed fear, not of bullets or betrayal, but of losing a woman. Lila turned away, her trembling hands wrapping around the cold cup of coffee. Her heart ached so hard she could hardly breathe, but she knew she had to leave him, or be dragged forever into the spiral of blood and darkness. As for Dante, even though reason told him to let go, his heart had already decided. He would not stop until he found a way to bring Lila back to him, even if it cost him the entire underworld he had built. The storm hit the city on a Friday night. rain pouring down as if to wash away every trace. But for Dante Moretti, the true storm wasn't outside. It was surging inside the underworld. Rossi was dead, but the people he had dealt with were still alive. Valenti, Dante's lifelong rival, would not miss this chance. This time he didn't just want territory, he wanted Dante to kneel. And to do that, he went after the one weakness the entire city believed the Mafia boss didn't have, a waitress named Lila Carter. Lila disappeared on a rainy afternoon. Maya ran to Dante in panic, her face pale. They took her! Two strange men dragged Lila into a truck. I screamed, but they pulled guns. I couldn't do anything. Dante went still. Every vein in his body froze. Then his eyes darkened, his voice a low growl. Valenti. An hour later, a photo arrived on his phone. Lila, tied up, sitting in a damp warehouse, her face bruised but her eyes defiant. The message read, "Come alone, or she dies, and your empire dies with her." Dante's base shook as the news spread. His men crowded around the map table, shouting, arguing. "We need to gather our forces," one yelled. "No, it's a trap," another countered. Dante stayed silent. He stared at Lila's picture. All the noise around him faded into nothing. In his mind, there was only one choice, but it also meant bearing everything he had built with blood and iron over the years. Keep the empire, or save the woman he loved. His heart clenched. Dante Moretti had never imagined himself cornered like this, but when he remembered Lila's eyes, the eyes that had looked at him, not with fear but with fragile trust, he knew the answer. He rose, his voice deep like a funeral bell. "I'm going alone." His men erupted. "Boss Moretti, you can't." "You'll die." Dante turned, his gaze sharp as steel. "From the moment she walked into my life, I stopped being immortal. If I have to die, I'll die protecting the only thing that keeps me human." The room fell silent. No one dared stop him. That night, Dante drove the black sedan through the rain toward the coast, toward Valenti's lair. The old warehouse stood isolated on a wasteland, a yellow light spilling from within. He stopped the car, pulled his pistol from its holster, and loaded 2 extra magazines. A folding knife slid into his boot. His breathing was steady, but his eyes burned. "Wait for me, Lila." The warehouse door burst open with a powerful kick. Light flared. Shouts rang out. "He's here!" Just as expected, dozens of guns aimed at him. But Dante didn't retreat. He surged forward, each shot cracking loudly, dropping men in seconds. Blood splattered the walls. Screams echoed. In the center of the room, Lila was tied to a chair, her mouth gagged. When she saw him, her eyes widened, terror and despair colliding. "Dante!" she choked behind the cloth. He roared, gunning down 2 guards and lunging forward. But Valenti stepped from the shadows, a black pistol aimed at Lila's head. "Slow down, Moretti," he sneered. "One more step and she dies." "All I have to do is squeeze the trigger." The room froze. Rain outside pounded like war drums. Dante stopped, his grip tightening on his gun. Valenti smirked. "What will you choose? The nameless waitress or the empire you built? Drop the gun and I'll spare her. Keep it and you lose everything." Lila shook her head, tears spilling. She wanted to scream, "Don't give in," but the gag silenced her. Dante closed his eyes for a moment. Then slowly he lowered his gun to the floor. His hands lifted, empty. But his eyes did not yield. "This empire can be lost," he said, voice hoarse, "but not her." Valenti faltered for half a second at the bluntness of it. And in that instant, Dante struck. He lunged forward like a predator, kicking the gun away, seizing Valenti, yanking the knife from his boot, and plunging it straight into his chest. A shrill scream tore through the room. Valenti collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. Chaos erupted, but his men fled in terror. Dante dropped to his knees, quickly untying Lila. She burst into tears, her trembling hands touching his bloodied face. "You're insane," she sobbed. Dante pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she felt his ribcage shudder. "Maybe," he whispered, "but for you, I'd lose everything." Outside, the storm still raged, but amid the blood and bodies in that embrace, Lila knew. The real storm had already passed. Gun smoke still hung in the air as Dante cut the last rope binding Lila's wrists. He grabbed her hand, pulling her up urgently. Go, Lila. We have to get out now. But before she could move, the iron door at the back of the warehouse crashed open. A squad of gunmen poured in, AR-15s gleaming under the sickly yellow lights. Valenti might be dead, but his men were not. Their voices rose in a hate-filled roar. Kill him! Don't let the girl survive! Dante shoved Lila behind a row of rusted shipping containers, drawing 2 pistols at once and firing back. The sharp crack of gunfire tore through the sound of rain. Shell casings clattered across the cement like a metallic downpour. Stay low, he barked. Lila crouched, hands over her head, her heart hammering. She watched him, the man shielding her like a giant shadow in the flicker of muzzle flashes. Even wounded, Dante's movements were precise, lethal. But there were too many of them. A bullet ripped through the air, slamming into his shoulder. Blood sprayed, soaking his shirt. Dante stiffened for half a heartbeat, jaw clenched. Dante, Lila cried. He turned, the depth of his black eyes flickering with something fierce. I'm fine. Still on my feet. He shoved a container aside, dragging Lila deeper into the shadows, covering her with his own body. Another round splintered the wooden post behind him. The smell of smoke, blood, and rust choked the air. You're badly hurt, she trembled. Let me... Quiet. His voice cut through, low and drum-like, yet rough. You have to live. Do you hear me? Lila's eyes filled with tears. You can't die for me. Dante leaned down, forehead resting against hers for a brief heartbeat in the storm of bullets. His grip on her shoulders was like a vow carved into blood. If I die, he whispered, at least I've lived as a man because of you. The words stabbed at her chest. She touched his face, feeling its warmth mixed with the coppery scent of blood. Her tears fell onto his hand, mingling with dark red streaks. The gunfire roared on, but Dante seemed to feel nothing except her. He inhaled sharply, then suddenly pushed Lila down and sprang up, firing 2 quick rounds at the door. 2 men dropped, but another bullet punched into his side. Blood burst hot across his ribs. Still, he didn't stop. In a swift motion, he snatched a rifle from a fallen gunman and unleashed a hail of bullets, clearing a path. The attackers faltered, curses echoing as they retreated. Lila crawled to him, clutching his arm, her voice breaking. Enough! You can't take any more. Dante gave a rough, trembling laugh, a real laugh, ragged but alive. I promise to protect you. To the end. He swayed but stayed standing, his body a blood-streaked wall between her and death. More rounds whizzed by, and he turned, taking them in his back, his hand locked tight on the trigger. At last, the gunfire died down. Only the stench of smoke and the drum of rain on the tin roof remained. The survivors fled, leaving a chaotic battlefield behind. Dante dropped to one knee, breath ragged, blood flowing freely. Lila rushed to him, tears streaming. You're insane, she whispered, holding him, her hands trembling as she pressed against his wounds. You can't throw your life away for me. Dante leaned his head on her shoulder, his voice a hoarse murmur. You don't understand. You gave me something I never had. I have to protect it, no matter the cost. Lila clutched him tight, her tears mingling with the rain. In that moment, amid smoke, gunfire, and the scent of blood, they were no longer a mob boss and a waitress. They were just a man and a woman, clinging to one fragile thing the underworld had never known: humanity. The storm passed, leaving the city streaked with blood and smoke. Valenti was dead, his faction retreating, but the cost to Dante was brutal. His body was covered in wounds, his empire shaken, and many of his men turned their backs or disappeared. He lay immobile for weeks in a villa on the outskirts, his body crisscrossed with injuries. Lila stayed by his side without leaving, changing his bandages, making soup, and sitting silently by his bed. On some nights when the pain racked him and he cried out, he gripped her hand so tightly it felt like he might crush it, and she, fragile but unyielding, would only whisper softly, "Stay quiet and don't move. You'll get through this." That whisper took him back to the night of destiny in the bar, and every time it kept him alive. As the wounds began to heal, Dante practiced walking in the small garden behind the house. Gone was the imposing mob boss. He moved slowly, breathing hard. But his eyes had changed, no longer filled with darkness, but the weariness of a man who had endured everything. One afternoon, Lila brought out a plate of warm apple pie, its scent filling the air. Dante sat on a wooden chair, staring at the rising steam, then gave a small laugh. You know, this is more dangerous than guns. Because it can take you down, she asked, lips curving slightly. No, because it makes me want to give everything up. He lifted his head, his black eyes now softer. And I've decided, Lila. I'm leaving it all. The empire, the power, the blood. I don't need it anymore. She froze. A fragile hope flickered in her chest, but her eyes stayed steady. You mean it? I've lost too much to know that no throne is worth more than the touch of your hand. Lila sat beside him, looking straight at him. If you really want me to stay, I have one condition. He tilted his head, smiling faintly. What condition? She took his rough hand and held it tight. No more blood, no more guns, just us. The air stilled. Dante gazed at her for a long time. The scars on his body throbbed, but deep inside, for the first time, he felt light. No more blood, no more guns. Just us, he repeated hoarsely, like an oath. News of Dante Moretti's withdrawal from the underworld spread quickly. Some were shocked, some sneered, others stayed wary. But Dante didn't care. He sold off assets, withdrew his money from deals, and severed ties with those once considered allies. One morning, Dante and Lila left the city in an old car. They drove down cracked roads, leaving behind gray buildings and blood-soaked memories. Their destination, a small seaside town where no one knew who they were. There they rented a tiny wooden house and opened a modest cafe. Lila baked apple pies and brewed coffee. Dante fixed chairs, sometimes sitting by the window, reading the newspaper. They lived like ordinary people, though every scar on his skin told an extraordinary story. On some nights when the waves crashed outside, Dante would wake from nightmares, seeing again his family's destruction, red blood on the floor. But each time Lila wrapped her arms around him and whispered, "It's over. You still have me." And he would drift back to sleep, lighter than he had ever been. One afternoon the cafe was busy. A child ran and spilled a glass of water. Dante bent down to wipe it up, his gentle smile making the whole room fall silent. Lila stood behind the counter, watching him, her heart tightening with happiness. That was the moment she realized. The ice wall had completely melted. The man before her was no longer the cold-blooded kingpin, but Dante, the man who gave up everything just to hold on to love. And she whispered to herself, "Just us." A year passed faster than Lila ever imagined. Since that stormy, blood-soaked night, her world and Dante's had changed completely. They no longer lived in shadowy warehouses, no longer flinched at the hiss of bullets. Instead, every morning, Lila opened the wooden door of their small cafe on the town square. The scent of apple pie and fresh coffee drifting into the air. The simple sign out front read only, "Lantern Cafe." Dante usually arrived before her, dressed in a plain shirt instead of the cold, black suits of his past. He would sit at the window table, reading the newspaper, pausing now and then to greet regulars. People saw a tall man with scars he never bothered to hide, but he wore a warm smile that convinced everyone their cafe's owner was a good man. No one in town knew he had once been a name that made a city tremble, and Dante had no intention of letting them know. Over the year, he didn't just step away from the darkness. He began doing things he had never once considered. Part of his old fortune was invested in a charity fund for poor children, while another part was invested in hospitals and schools. Every project carried the name of a family member he had lost. One day, Dante brought Lila to cut the ribbon at a small high school library. He wore a light-colored suit, shook every hand, his eyes shining with a simple pride. When a young boy thanked him for giving them a place to read, Lila saw a light in Dante's gaze she had never seen when he sat on a Mafia throne. True joy. "You've changed so much," she whispered as they stood beneath the library's porch, the wind tugging at her hair. Dante turned, smiling gently. "Maybe, not changed. Maybe I've just finally found who I really am. One autumn afternoon, the cafe bustled with life. A group of students strummed guitars, old men played chess in the corner, and children darted between tables. Amid the noise, Dante sat in peace, his eyes following Lila as she hurried between customers. As the last golden light poured through the window, Lila came to him, setting down a slice of freshly baked apple pie. Dante looked up, catching her radiant smile. "Remember?" she said softly, leaning just a little closer. "The first time you really laughed, it was over apple pie." Dante chuckled quietly, taking her hand across the table. "I remember. And I remember who made me laugh." For a moment, the noise around them disappeared. There were only two people, their hands entwined, and the memory of the path that had brought them here. When the cafe closed and the town sank into gentle night, Leela and Dante sat together on the wooden porch, watching the street lamps cast warm light over the narrow street. In the distance, the sea sang its endless song. She turned her head, looking into eyes that had once been as cold as steel, but were now impossibly warm. In a tender whisper, she repeated the words that had begun it all. "Stay quiet and don't move, because this time, you're already where you belong." Dante smiled faintly, wrapping her tight against his chest. No more blood, no more guns, only the steady rhythm of his heartbeat joined with hers. A new dawn had arrived, and they both knew that from now on, they were no longer haunted by shadows of the past, but living a true life. A life of love, of trust, and of two souls who had found each other in the darkness. Thank you for being part of Soul Stories. If you're listening on another channel, come back to the official home so you can continue our love journeys together with the Soul Stories family.